everyone, welcome back to another video. It's me, Pooja. Thanks so much for tuning in to the channel. And as many of you might know who have been following the channel for a while, I am currently reading 80 books from around the world in a journey that is perhaps not so creatively called Around the World in 80 Books. So I've done 2 installments of this already where I've talked through the first 20 books that I've read, and I will link both of those up here somewhere at some point so you can go check them out if you haven't seen those yet. But today I'm going to be doing the 3rd set of books that I have to talk about. Now, the past 2 sets that I did were both just kind of random. I had just kind of read books from different countries and then talked about them. But this set is actually going to have a theme, so that's kind of interesting. I suppose I am progressing in this world of coming up with interesting video ideas. So anyway, what I did for this 3rd set of books was basically look at which countries lie on the equator, and then I found books from those countries to read. And I thought this would be cool because this weekend I am actually at the beach, and so I'm filming this video at the beach. I will show you guys right now where I'm at. It's very nice. It's kind of cloudy, but it's been a lovely time here so far. But anyway, I thought this would be a nice way to show these particular countries. So without further ado, let's get right into it. I apologize if there's some wind. It's a very windy beach. My hair is flying in all sorts of directions, so that's great. But, you know, it is what it is. So anyway, let's get started. Now, the first book I have is from Ecuador. It's Pozo Wells by Gabriela Alemán. I've talked about this book in a couple of videos already, so you guys might be familiar with it, actually in my most recent videos. So this book is, of course, this like eco-feminist noir thriller that takes place in a fictional town of Pozo Wells, which is near Guayaquil in Ecuador. And it's fascinating. It is crazy, super whack book that kind of delves into themes of politics and violence against women and ecological terrorism and all these things, and just all these things are very pertinent modern contemporary issues, but in a very weird way. I think I mentioned this also in one video, but the opening scene is a politician like going to the bathroom on stage in front of a field of like bajillion people, and then he gets electrocuted, so that's great. So it was a super weird book, but really interesting, very thought-provoking, and quite short, so that was good too. The next one, kind of just going from west to east, is Colombia. So I have Fish Soup, which is by Margarita Garcia Robayo. And this book is actually a compilation of 2 novellas and a book of short stories. It's very interesting because it talks about these problems that modern Colombians are experiencing in a very humorous and cynical way. I found this, I think it was a novella, it's called Waiting for a Hurricane. Super, super interesting. I would highly recommend that. And I think some of these stories have actually been released already in a separate collection, and then she kind of combined them into this overall compilation of the full book, Fish Soup. Awesome book, highly recommend. And you can read it in bits and pieces because it's just a bunch of short stories and 2 novellas. Okay, the next one that I have is Brazil, and that is The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. Now, Clarice Lispector is probably one of the most famous authors from Brazil. She's super popular, and I was really excited to read one of her books. And The Hour of the Star was weird. I feel like this is a running theme. I read a lot of books that are just like, what just happened when I finished them? Super eccentric. I think this was the last book that she wrote before passing away. And it kind of follows this typist through her life and like deals with these, you know, crazy themes of like how she's dealing with romance in her life and stuff like that. And it's just written in such a strange way, but it's like kind of thought-provoking in that way as well. So that was pretty cool. Then the next one I have is from Gabon, which is The Fury and Cries of Women by Angele Rewiri. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So this book, now we're in Africa, was awesome. It was so good. It really talks about like the theories of modern feminism and how that takes place in the life of the main character, Emilienne, and just kind of dealing with all these issues that women always have to, you know, dealing with not having the power to have economic freedom, even though she is actually making more money than her husband, dealing with issues of how to handle things she's going through with her children and stuff like that. And just like all these issues are very pertinent to a modern woman, and it's really interestingly explored. And I think Angela Rewiri is probably one of the early feminist authors of Gabon who's been translated into English, so it's really an honor that we have her work to read. And this book was kind of hard to find, but I'm really, really glad that I did because it was really well done. So the next book is from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and it is Tram 83 by Fiston Mwanza Mujila. Again, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. This was also a pretty short book, and it was disturbing in a lot of different ways. It kind of deals with the underbelly of this unnamed city in the Congo, probably Kinshasa. I imagine it's supposed to be like a parody of Kinshasa, essentially, and kind of takes place in this little establishment called Tram 83, and deals with all these issues taking place in the lives of people who are going through poverty and how desperate they can be, but really fleshes them out into these very fascinating characters and kind of how they're navigating their political environment while just honestly trying to survive. And it's told in such a way that you get to explore these people dealing with different facets of that life. So that was super good book, also pretty quick to get through. I actually got it from the library, so that was easy as well. Really enjoyed that one. The next book I have is from Uganda, and this is Kintu by Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. Again, hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. So this book is actually quite famous. I think it's known by a lot of different people, and it's a really interesting analysis of kind of all these issues that take place in modern Uganda, but told in a really interesting way, because it kind of goes back to this folklore tale of this guy Kintu that takes place hundreds of years ago, and then sort of follows his descendants into the modern day, and kind of how those things that took place in ancient history are now sort of playing out in, you know, the modern world and what that exactly looks like. It talks about all these you know, interesting facets of like how tribes in Uganda deal with each other, and what difficulties they face, and what certain people are subject to, what kind of persecution some people are subject to in the modern day. It also deals with themes of colonialism, of course, which has affected that country a lot. So I thought this was actually a really good book for someone who hasn't really been exposed to Ugandan culture a lot, and it made me really feel like I was understanding the background and history of the characters I was reading about, rather than just the conflict they were going through in contemporary times. So loved it, very good. It deserves all the awards that it's won. The next one is from Kenya, and for this one I read Unbowed, which is the memoir by Wangari Maathai, who obviously has won a Nobel Peace Prize, is a super inspirational woman who has fought for ecological preservation, planting trees, and just conservation and the environment in Africa. And she has done so much for the world, so it was really interesting to kind of read how she grew up and all of the things she dealt with in her family, what her responses were to a lot of the controversies that she faced, both inside and outside of her own country. And I thought that was, you know, she did a fantastic job of talking about all of these issues that she faced throughout her life. I feel like she gave a pretty nuanced understanding of, you know, what role she played in this overarching ecosystem. So that was really cool. I really enjoyed that one, would highly recommend. But it is like a memoir, so, you know, it's not like it kind of just talks about her life. It doesn't really have a plot necessarily, but it's super interesting to read about these inspirational people and what they've done throughout their life. So the next one is from Somalia, and I'm sorry the wind is getting worse here. So the next book is from Somalia, and for this I actually chose to read an anthology of Somali poetry, which is translated by Bogomil Andrzejewski, but it's actually written by a number of different authors. Obviously each poet is different, and he kind of on each poem talks about a little bit of the history when it's known. Some of these poets, like, no one knows who wrote these poems, but when it is known, he kind of tells like who the person was and like what they did. I enjoyed this. I thought it was interesting. I don't frankly read that much poetry, so that was kind of new for me, but it was a lot of fun to kind of just read the poetry of this different country. I did find that many of the poems were very literal, which I'm not the biggest fan of, like super literal poetry, and kind of had like all these heroic themes and stuff like that. So that was something I guess like those types of poems I don't really like as much. And he kind of, in the author's note, he sort of, or I guess the translator's note, he sort of acknowledges this, but there's not honestly much female representation, and that's because many of the poems that women used to write in these villages didn't necessarily get preserved or like passed down, or some of the poets that are anonymous in the book might have actually been women, we just don't know. So that was, you know, I wish that we had been able to preserve some of those older poems by women of bygone eras, but unfortunately that's obviously not the author's fault or the translator's fault in any way. But yeah, that was an interesting, it was a good look at what Somali culture was like back in the day, and it kind of goes through time, so loved that. Just not really the type of poetry that I truly enjoy as much, but it was definitely a very interesting book to read. We have left the African continent and we are into Asia. So the next book is from the Maldives, and this is Don Hiala and Ali Fulhu by Abdullah Sadiq. I think this story is actually from folklore from the Maldives, but it's kind of written down. And this book was, I couldn't even find the actual book, but there's a PDF online that I think the government of the Maldives has posted to sort of increase interest in literature of their country. So I thought that was kind of cool, and I just downloaded it and read it on my computer. It was a really interesting look at this story of this man and kind of these curses and stuff that happened to him. You know, it wasn't something that I, very enjoyed a ton, but it was cool. Like, I could tell this was like a very powerful story of folklore from the culture, and I learned a lot about what living in the Maldives is like. That's not just those like fancy villas that you see from a lot of tourists that go from the US where I live or many other countries. Like, we've kind of just turned this vision of this entire country into these like villas on picturesque blue waters, and just call that like that's the like that's not it, that's like the resorts at the Maldives, like that's not the country. So it was kind of cool to get more insight into what the actual culture is like. So enjoyed that. And then the last book is from Indonesia, and this is Beauty is a Wound by Eka Kurniawan. And I think this is, again, one of the first books to be translated into English from Indonesia, or maybe it was written in English originally. This book was so powerful, you guys. It was so good. I loved it. It was quite long. It was like almost 500 pages maybe, but I went through it so quickly. I really enjoyed it. It basically takes place in sort of the immediate post-colonial era in Indonesia, right after the Dutch sort of leave, and follows this woman who is actually Dutch origin, but her name is native Indonesian, and she becomes this like very well-known prostitute and sort of lifts herself out of poverty after, obviously, after the Dutch have fallen. She's kind of left to fend for herself, and she manages to do so through being a prostitute, and it's actually a very empowering look at what that was like, and then follows her family's story and how they've kind of endured ghosts of their past because of the actions of some of their ancestors, and kind of how that sort of plays out in the lives of her 4 daughters. So it's a very beautifully written book. I loved it. I went through it so quickly. It was so good. I highly recommend anyone read this. It was a very interesting look at sort of how colonialism and how honestly, it's like the actions of one colonial man and how that can trickle down into like his descendants who are dealing with this post-colonial world. And it deals with a lot of political themes as well as a lot of personal themes. As you guys probably know, those are some of my favorite books that kind of deal with both aspects of the story. So I really, really enjoyed that. But anyway, those were my 10 books for my series of books in this Around the World in 80 Books for countries that are on the equator. And so that is books 21 through 30. I'm actually a pretty solid way through the next series as well, which I will let you guys know what it is. But let me know if any of these books sound interesting to you, if you plan on reading any of them. I know I've mentioned a few of them in past videos as well, so you might have already been planning on reading any of them. If you've read them already, let me know what you think. But anyways, thank you so much as usual for watching, and make sure you tune in for the next video, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. All right, bye-bye.